Language is an ever-present part of our lives. It's a tool we use to communicate, a vehicle for social connections, and a method to navigate our world. Since language is so ubiquitous and ever-present, it can be tempting to think of it as something neutral, when in fact it informs many aspects of our lives. Accents in particular have a huge impact on our social environment, and on language as a whole. So why is that? What are accents in the first place, and why are they important? Welcome to Word Brain. I'm Hannah, and today we're going to learn what makes accents so interesting. Let's start from the beginning. What is an accent? Put simply, an accent is a descriptor of the way your speech sounds. This applies in general to pronunciation and most often affects vowel sounds and some consonants. Dialects are one step further than accents. They include the pronunciation differences covered by accents, as well as grammatical and phrasal differences. That's all well and good, but why do accents exist in the first place? This is where the social underpinnings of language really come into focus. Accents and dialects are formed when a group of people is isolated and talks mostly to one another. All the members of that group begin to sound alike. This is why so many accents are regional, like British English versus American English, or Southern and Northern American accents. You may also notice that accents often form in childhood. During the first few years of a child's life, often called the critical period by linguists, they listen to the sounds around them and build their own linguistic inventory based on what they hear. So kids pick up the accent used in their social environment. If they hear people around them pronouncing boat with a monophthong, boat, then they'll pick up that monophthong too. In this way, our accents signal to others our social alignment. You talk like those people, so you must be one of them. Accents are strongly influenced by childhood language exposure, but language is fluid throughout the lifespan, and similarly, an individual's accent can evolve along with their circumstances, often as an unconscious method of social alignment. For instance, studies have shown that gay men and other queer individuals share speech characteristics, which signal to members of that group that they're one of them. You may have noticed this phenomenon on a smaller scale, like when a group of friends starts to speak more like one another. In this way, our accents are almost like fingerprints. They're our unique linguistic signature of where we've been and who we are. So that's what accents are and how they're affected by the world around us. But what about the reverse? How do our accents affect the way we interact with and experience the world? Well, just like how accents are created by our social groups, they also serve to reinforce those groups. In-group biases show up across psychology, and language is no different. Even subconsciously, we sort people into groups based on how they speak, and this process begins even in infants. We expect people to be better connected to and share preferences with people who share their accent. This unification and common identity is seen and taken advantage of on a macro scale too. One of the main purposes of an official, governmentally designated national language is to unify a population under one linguistic identity. For example, when some Balkan countries were unified as Yugoslavia, the language and many dialects spoken in that region was called Serbo-Croatian. But after these countries separated in civil war, designating official languages like Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian created an independent sense of national identity. Like other in-groups, we're better able to distinguish between voices that are similar to our own than those that are different. For example, as a speaker of Midwestern American English, I'm pretty good at hearing the difference between my own accent and speakers from the American North or South, but I'm not very good at picking out distinctions between speakers of the many dialects of British English. And then there's the fact that, by definition, a linguistic in-group creates an out-group. This us versus them distinction is directly linked to stereotyping. For instance, we might assume that someone with a Southern American accent is sweet but not that bright, and might assume a speaker from England is well-educated or sophisticated. These impressions may seem benign at first blush, but they lead to linguistic discrimination in many cases. Speakers with non-native accents are passed over for jobs and on housing applications. College students rate lecturers as harder to understand when they have a non-standard accent, even though studies show there is no material effect on comprehension. Speakers of a non-standard accent are less likely to be perceived as truthful, which impacts everything from court cases to everyday conversations. And for many speakers, this prejudice is bundled with many others, like racism, sexism, or distrust towards foreigners. To learn more about this, I interviewed Dr. Emilie Maurel-Destruel and Dr. Shea, two linguists at the University of Iowa. Their recent research investigates the intersection of accent and social identity, and highlights the complex processes at play in linguistic prejudice.
My name is Emilie Maurel-Destruel. I'm an associate professor in French and Italian and linguistics. I'm interested in the meaning that you don't get to hear or you don't get to see.
So my name is Christine Shea, and I'm Associate Professor of Spanish Linguistics. I have a double appointment in the Spanish and Portuguese department and also in the linguistics department. Thread running through everything is sound and experience. So how does your experience with language affect the way that you perceive sound and also the way that you produce sound?
You can't study language without its social context. I mean, when you speak, you don't speak in a vacuum. You speak with your own personal accent based on your linguistic background, biographical background, experience. I mean, your whole world experience and knowledge obviously is going to play a part, is going to play a role in how you speak and what you look like, and who you speak to. So like your entire social context affects your language and therefore affects how you're perceived or interpreted or how you sound.
I would also comment on trying to move away as much as possible from simplistic explanations. I don't know if you're very familiar with the sociolinguistics literature, but up until a relatively recent past, meaning, sociolinguistics came about as a field with Labov in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were what are called macro social categories that people looked at. So women speak like this, men speak like that, middle class, black, white, very large and imprecise categories. So one thing that I'm very interested in is to see how these macro social categories, if you want, break down across different contexts. Language prejudice, I suppose, is kind of the way I would put it, or language bias is one of the, I always say this to friends and colleagues, it's one of the few remaining areas where people are allowed to be judgmental, right? And you run into people, even in the hallways here at the university, you run into people who judge others because they, taller than me versus taller than I, right? These things that are completely prescriptive and really don't matter, but yet we judge people by that standard. So you can be thinking about this within the same language and also across languages. You can think about it in terms of learners of a language. What should ESL learners be learning? What should they be evaluated on? It has a huge effect on testing. It has a huge effect on hiring. There's a whole industry dedicated to accent modification that really should just go away. But yet, when you talk to people who are learning English as a second language, they are convinced that that is the way they want to sound, because that is the message that they're getting.
Linguistic discrimination and prejudice is a complicated issue, and we've only just scratched the surface today. But my hope is that you'll walk away from this video with a more nuanced understanding of what accents are and how they impact us every day of our lives. Together, we can become more aware of the sounds that surround us, create space for those who speak differently from us, and celebrate the voices that make us who we are. If you're interested in the social side of linguistics, and in particular the relationship between accents and social justice, I highly recommend Katherine D. Kinzler's book, How You Say It. This book was my own introduction to sociolinguistics several years ago, and it inspired my curiosity for language as a social influence in our lives. The writing is intelligent, accessible, and well-researched. If you liked this episode, you should definitely pick it up.